stories glow. Palm lantern ignite, where the tales will flow. Whispers of the night, under moonlit skies. Every word so bright, in your mind it lies. Lantern light guides you through the night. Every tale in sight makes your heart ignite.
Sam has just returned from work. How will he tell his family that he has been fired? The economy was heavily hit, and everyone felt the effects of worldwide inflation. He only obtained the position as a production manager in January. The company had been suffering and eventually went bankrupt. He was unemployed just a few weeks before Christmas and New Year. There were bills to pay, a 6-year-old son, and a 3-month-old baby daughter to care for. He was really hoping to purchase Julie a great gift this year. She had sacrificed for them as a family. Her family shunned her for settling with Sam, rather than the man they had chosen for her. She abandoned her family's wealth to rough it with Sam. Sam entered the 2-bedroom apartment that had become their family home for the past 4 years. He was greeted with the smells of steak and creamy Alfredo pasta. He tried to hide his problems beneath a well-formed smile. He hugged his son Bryan, who ran to him in his typical enthusiastic dance. They performed their routine daddy-son dance. He hugged Julie and gave her a magnificent mouthful kiss. Julie saw through him and asked him, "Baby, are you okay? I will tell you about it later. Right now, all I want to do is spend time with you and my children," he explained. Sam went to the bassinet, pecked his little pumpkin Cynthia, and then went to the bathroom. His baby girl was named after his grandmother, who cared for him after his parents died in a plane crash. His parents only had temporary life insurance, which ended a month before the disaster. It left Sam, the sole child, with nothing. Cynthia, his paternal grandma, cared for him all by herself. She ensured he got to college. His grandma passed away during the final semester of his senior year. Her death shook him, but he faced his semester squarely after reading the letter his grandmother had left him, urging him to enjoy every bit of his life. She went further to say that she, along with his parents, would be watching over him and guiding him from heaven. 7 years after graduation, Sam felt hopeless. He had been in and out of jobs, despite graduating at the top of his class. In the bathroom, he cried and called out to his grandmother. He missed her so much and wished she were here with him. After crying in the shower, he came out to join his family for dinner. He helped Julie set the dining table. They all said a few words of prayer and enjoyed their meal. During dinner, Bryan asked his dad when Cynthia would be going back inside Mommy's tummy, since she came out of there. Sam and Julie almost spat out their drinks. They both laughed at Bryan's question. Julie responded that, just like Sam, Cynthia was here to stay with them as a family. She wasn't going back. They all enjoyed family time together. Later, Sam prepared Bryan and Cynthia for bed, and went to join Julie, who was waiting for him, while they were in bed. Julie urged him to share what was bothering him. Sam explained to Julie that he had lost his job. Julie consoled him, saying, "Maybe God has other plans for you. Maybe he wants you to do something different than just working a job." She hugged Sam and promised him that she would be there for him in every decision and step he took. He hugged Julie back, and then a bright idea came to him. "Julie, what do you think about spending the holidays at my grandma's house in South Carolina, the one she left for me?" This is some telepathy going on right now. I can't believe I was thinking the same thing. We have had so many white Christmases in New Jersey over the years. It is time we tried something different. They both laughed, and for a moment Sam forgot his troubles. On December 20th, Sam and his family flew to Grandma Cynthia's house in Easley, South Carolina. The 3-bedroom home was dusty and filled with cobwebs. Sam left his wife and kids in the car, with the engine running while he did a quick cleanup to make the house safe for them. Once inside, they were all excited. Easley was chilly, but sunny, with moderate humidity of around 69 to 70%. Julie and Sam got down to business, and in no time, the house was pristine. While cleaning the kitchen, Julie found Grandma Cynthia's recipe book in a drawer. Sam went grocery shopping, and Julie prepared fried chicken, fried okra, and mashed potatoes using Grandma's recipes. Bryan couldn't stop talking about how good the food was. The family settled in nicely, enjoying the cozy atmosphere of the home. After dinner, Sam showed Bryan his family photos, pictures of him and his grandma volunteering at soup kitchens to feed the homeless. As they looked at the photos, Sam shared stories about Grandma Cynthia. There was one in particular that had everyone laughing. He recounted how, one evening, Grandma couldn't afford much chicken and fried just a few pieces. She had planned for them to eat one piece each that night, and save the rest for the next day. The chicken was so tasty I couldn't resist, Sam said, grinning. I snuck into the kitchen, grabbed another piece, and ate it to the barest bone. I thought I had gotten away with it. I even wiped my mouth clean and tried to get rid of all the evidence. Everyone leaned in, eager to hear the rest of the story. But then, Sam continued, chuckling, Grandma was standing right behind me the whole time. She punished me that night, and for an entire week. I had to eat my meals without any meat. She told me I needed to overcome my greed, and reminded me that she wasn't raising a thief. Julie and the kids laughed as Sam mimicked his grandma's stern voice. She also made me read the 10 Commandments every day for 3 months. I learned a big lesson that day. After that incident, I was never tempted to take something that wasn't mine. Bryan stared at his dad in awe, his young mind processing the story. Wow, Dad, Grandma Cynthia must have been really strict. She was, Sam said with a smile, but she loved me more than anything, and she always wanted me to do the right thing. The family spent the rest of the evening sharing stories and laughter, feeling closer to Grandma Cynthia, even though she wasn't physically there. On December 24th, Sam and his family drove to Greenville for the Christmas parade, and spent the day strolling around. They also participated in a Christmas show at one of the parks, which featured opportunities to meet Santa and Mrs. Claus, live music, and a beautifully decorated Christmas tree. Bryan was thrilled, his excitement shining brighter than the holiday lights. While exploring the festivities, Sam and Julie stopped at a jewelry stand. Sam picked out a necklace for Julie and gently tried it on her neck. They were so engrossed in the moment that they didn't notice when Bryan wandered off. Bryan, curious and adventurous, wandered farther and farther away, eventually losing sight of his parents. The bustling crowd made it impossible for him to retrace his steps. Feeling lost and unsure of where to go, he noticed an older black woman sitting quietly in a corner. He approached her and asked innocently, "Are you Grandma Cynthia?" The old lady chuckled warmly and replied, "No, I'm not Grandma Cynthia. I'm Grandma Betty. But you can tell me about her." Bryan's face lit up, and he eagerly began sharing stories. "My daddy says Grandma Cynthia made the best fried chicken. She used to feed the homeless. I really want to meet her." Betty smiled kindly. "Grandma Cynthia sounds like a wonderful woman. I had loved to meet her too. My daddy said she's gone to be with his parents in heaven," Bryan explained. Betty placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Then heaven is surely blessed to have her there," she said softly. "But your parents must be worried about you. Let's get you back to them." Meanwhile, Sam and Julie realized Bryan was missing. Panic set in as they searched the area frantically, calling his name over the noise of the crowd. The sheer number of people made it difficult to see or hear anything clearly. They reported Bryan missing to the event security, who began their own search. Unaware of the frantic search, Betty stayed with Bryan, sitting in the same quiet corner where he had found her. She hoped his parents would eventually make their way there. "Do you know your address, sweetheart?" Betty asked gently. Bryan shook his head. "No, we just moved, and I don't remember it yet." Betty nodded, her kind smile never wavering. "That's okay, darling. We'll stay right here, and I'm sure your parents will find you soon." Bryan and Betty talked for hours. their conversation lively and engaging. Bryan's wisdom and humor brought a smile to Betty's face, a warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. Her loneliness melted away as she enjoyed his witty personality and innocent charm. Deep down, Betty knew the right thing to do was to report Bryan's presence to the park security. But she selfishly held on to his company. Her life had been painfully empty. Her two sons, successful tech entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley, had abandoned her after she refused to sell their magnificent family home to a company that wanted to build a luxurious hotel. Both were married with children of their own, but hadn't called or visited in years. "They're waiting for me to die," Betty had told herself bitterly many times, "just so they can inherit the house and sell it." Since her husband's passing 4 years ago, Betty had been living in isolation, weighed down by grief and the absence of her family. She had stopped living, merely existing in the shell of her once vibrant life. But Bryan was different, a breath of fresh air. For the first time in years, Betty felt alive. She took Bryan home, gave him some snacks, and dug out old toys from her son's room for him to play with. Bryan played happily, but kept asking about his parents. Betty eventually talked some sense into herself. His parents must be frantic. Guilt crept in, and she decided to act. Betty called 911 and explained the situation, describing Bryan's features and assuring him that his parents would be on their way soon. Meanwhile, Sam, Julie, and baby Cynthia had been scouring the park with security officers, hearts heavy with worry. When they received word about Bryan's location, they rushed to Betty's house. The reunion was emotional. Sam and Julie hugged Bryan tightly, tears streaming down their faces as relief washed over them. They thanked Betty profusely for taking care of their son. Bryan, in his innocent way, exclaimed, "Grandma Betty was so nice to me. She gave me snacks and toys." Grateful and touched by Betty's kindness, Sam and Julie decided to spend some time with her. They invited the officers to stay for a moment of gratitude before they left. During dinner they chatted, and Sam couldn't help but notice how much Betty reminded him of Grandma Cynthia. Betty was deeply thankful for their company, cherishing the warmth they brought into her lonely home. Sam and Julie even helped her mount her Christmas tree and decorated it. Betty felt a renewed sense of purpose, thanking God for sending Bryan her way this Christmas season. For the first time in years, she felt seen, cared for, and loved. That evening, Sam and his family drove home, their hearts full after the day's emotional event. The next day was Christmas. Bryan was the first to ask, "Can we go see Grandma Betty today?" Sam chuckled. "Of course, buddy. We promised her we'd come for Christmas, didn't we?" When they arrived at Betty's house, Bryan rushed out of the car and into Betty's arms. "Grandma Betty," he exclaimed, grinning from ear to ear. Betty knelt to his level and hugged him tightly, her eyes glistening with tears of joy. "I've been waiting for my Christmas gift to arrive," Betty said, ruffling Bryan's hair. "You mean me?" Bryan asked, his face lighting up. "Of course. You've brought so much joy to my Christmas, little one," she replied. Inside, Bryan sat by Betty as she flipped through an old photo album. Each picture told a story, and Bryan was an eager listener. "Who's this?" Bryan asked, pointing to a picture of a young Betty in a beautiful dress, standing next to a man in a sharp suit. "That's me and my husband Williams when we got married," Betty said, her voice soft with nostalgia. "We were so in love. He used to call me his little firecracker, because I always had a way of surprising him." Bryan giggled. "I think you're still a firecracker, Grandma Betty." Betty laughed heartily and hugged him. "You, young man, are a charmer, just like Williams was." Later in the afternoon, Betty taught Bryan how to play checkers. They sat at a small wooden table in her cozy living room, the sunlight streaming through the lace curtains. "You're getting good at this, Bryan," Betty said as he took one of her pieces. "Grandma Betty, you're just letting me win," he said, narrowing his eyes playfully. "Maybe," she teased, "but don't tell anyone. It'll be our little secret." Bryan beamed at her, delighted to share something special with his newfound grandmother. As the day wore on, Betty showed Bryan how to bake cookies using an old family recipe, while Sam and Julie relaxed with baby Cynthia in the living room. Julie would occasionally check on Grandma Betty and Bryan in the kitchen, They worked together in the kitchen, mixing dough and rolling it out. Flour ended up everywhere on Bryan's face, in Betty's hair, and even on the floor. "Oops," Bryan said, laughing as a puff of flour exploded when he dropped the bag. Betty laughed so hard she had to sit down. "Bryan, you're making this the messiest, most fun Christmas I've had in years." When the cookies were finally baked and cooling on the counter, Bryan leaned against Betty and said, "I think these are the best cookies ever, Grandma Betty." "That's because they're made with love, my little helper," she replied, kissing the top of his head. That afternoon, as the family gathered to eat, Bryan proudly shared the cookies with everyone. "Grandma Betty and I made these," he announced. Sam and Julie smiled, seeing how much Bryan and Betty had bonded in such a short time. It was clear that the connection between them was special. After lunch, Bryan sat next to Betty on the couch, resting his head on her shoulder. "Grandma Betty," he said sleepily, "I wish I could see you every day." Betty stroked his hair gently. "Oh, sweetheart, you've made this Christmas so special for me. I'll never forget it." Bryan drifted off to sleep in her arms, and Betty felt a warmth in her heart that she hadn't felt in years. She looked at Sam and Julie and whispered, "Thank you for bringing him into my life. He's my Christmas miracle." Betty opened up about her life to Sam and Julie. She shared how her sons, once the center of her world, had abandoned her, claiming they were always too busy. She confessed to feeling lonely and admitted that she had prayed for a different kind of Christmas this year. "God answered my prayers," Betty said, her voice trembling with emotion. "You all are the Christmas miracle I didn't know I needed." She reminisced about meeting her husband, Williams, when they were teenagers attending the same church. "I was an introvert," Betty said with a small smile. "I loved my quiet spaces. But Williams was the opposite, an extrovert who could light up any room with his charm." They began dating at 19, but lost touch during college. It wasn't until they both came home for Christmas at age 30 that they reunited. "We were each other's first loves," Betty said, her eyes sparkling with nostalgia. "The passion was still there, and a year later, we got married." She had her first son, Williams III, at 33, and her second, Richard, at 35. Together, she and her husband built a successful architectural firm. Life had been good, but over the years, the hustle and bustle of their firm became too much, especially with her husband passing. After Williams died, things took a darker turn. Her sons, entangled in the pursuit of wealth, wanted to sell the family home to a corporation, planning to convert it into a luxurious hotel. Betty refused, determined to preserve her memories and the legacy she and Williams had built together. "They stopped talking to me after that," Betty said, her voice heavy with sorrow. "Even as an introvert, I miss their company. One miss my grandchildren. But I won't be coerced into selling my home." She went on to describe how the 2 nurses she hired had stolen from her, forcing her to stop hiring help. Elderly homes weren't an option for her, as she preferred to stay connected to the love and memories embedded in her home. By dusk, Sam and his family prepared to leave, promising to visit again soon. Betty hugged each of them tightly, her heart lighter than it had been in years. That night, as Sam and Julie lay in bed, a sudden idea struck Sam. "I have got it," he said, turning to Julie, his voice filled with excitement. "I know what I want to do with my life." Julie listened intently, curiosity shining in her eyes as Sam began to share his plan. "I want to start an assisted living business for the elderly," Sam said with excitement. "We'll train caregivers to look after them in their homes. Once a week, we'll organize activities to help them connect with others. Things like gardening, volunteering at soup kitchens, or knitting for children." Julie's face lit up. "I love the idea already." "I can help with the gardening," she said enthusiastically. Sam nodded, his determination shining through. "We've neglected our elderly for far too long. It's time for a change." That night, Sam and Julie lay in bed, their minds buzzing with ideas. They ruminated on the plan, talking through every detail, until sleep finally claimed them. In the days leading up to New Year's, Sam poured his energy into crafting a business proposal. He visited Grandma Betty, asking her questions about what activities brought her the most joy. Betty was thrilled by Sam's plan to cater to the needs of the elderly. Spending time with children would be wonderful, Betty suggested one afternoon. It would help fill the void of missing my grandchildren when they aren't around. Sam jotted down her thoughts, inspired by her insight and enthusiasm. On New Year's Eve, Sam and Julie took their family and Grandma Betty to watch the fireworks. Bryan kept Grandma Betty engaged the entire evening, chattering about his friends at school and his latest adventures. Betty laughed and listened intently, her heart warmed by his stories. As midnight approached, the family celebrated together at Grandma Cynthia's house. Earlier that week, Bryan had picked out a necklace for Grandma Betty during one of their Christmas shopping trips. Though it wasn't expensive, the gesture meant the world to her. "This is beautiful, Bryan," Betty said, clasping the necklace around her neck. "It's perfect. Thank you, sweetheart," Bryan beamed. "I wanted to get you something special because you're special, Grandma Betty." As they sat around reminiscing, Betty flipped through an old photo album and came across pictures of Grandma Cynthia. She paused and smiled. "She must have been an amazing woman," Betty said, looking at Sam. "She raised a fine gentleman like you. You're carrying her legacy forward." Sam's eyes misted over. "Thank you, Betty. That means a lot." After the holidays, it was time for Sam and his family to return to New Jersey. Their goodbye with Grandma Betty was emotional, filled with promises to stay in touch. "We'll call you often," Sam assured her. "And we'll visit again soon. You've brought so much joy into my life," Betty said, holding Bryan close. "Thank you for giving me a Christmas and New Year I'll never forget." Back in New Jersey, Sam and Julie worked tirelessly to bring their assisted living business to life. They made sure to call Betty regularly, keeping her updated on their progress. Betty's wisdom and warmth became an integral part of their journey, as her feedback shaped the vision of the business, even miles apart. The bond between Grandma Betty and Sam's family grew stronger, proving that love and connection transcend distance. Sam took a job at an assisted living facility in New Jersey to earn money and learn the principles of the business he dreamed of starting. On February 19th, 2024, Sam made a video call to Grandma Betty to celebrate her 80th birthday. Bryan and the rest of the family took turns wishing her a happy birthday, their smiles lighting up the screen. Sam and Julie had hired a makeup artist to help Betty look her best for her special day. Grandma Betty insisted on wearing the necklace Bryan had bought for her. She was radiant, her joy contagious. Sam watched her laugh and smile, his heart full. "I'm so glad I get the chance to care for you, Grandma Betty," he said. "I wasn't able to do this for Grandma Cynthia, but I'm making up for it now." Betty's eyes softened. "You've already given me more than I ever dreamed of, Sam. Thank you." A month later, on March 20th, Sam received a devastating call from Mr. Barry, Grandma Betty's lawyer. Betty had passed away peacefully in her sleep the previous night. She had scheduled a meeting with Mr. Barry for that morning, but when he arrived, he found her lifeless body on her bed. Sam wept. The loss felt immense, but there was solace in knowing she had passed peacefully. At Betty's request, Sam and his family flew to South Carolina for her burial. Betty had planned her funeral meticulously. She was dressed in her wedding gown, her neck adorned with the necklace Bryan had given her. As per her wishes, Sam and his family wore white to celebrate her glorious transition from Earth. Bryan was gently told that Grandma Betty had gone to join Grandma Cynthia and his grandparents in heaven. Betty's two sons, Williams and Richard, arrived at the funeral dressed in stark black suits, their faces unreadable. After the service, the family gathered to hear the reading of Betty's will. When Mr. Barry revealed its contents, the room erupted in shock and anger. Betty had left her cherished home, her company shares, and her money to Bryan. "This is outrageous," Williams shouted, his voice echoing in the room. "She had no right," Richard added, his face flushed with fury. Mr. Barry, unperturbed, responded calmly. Mrs. Betty made her wishes very clear. She wanted her legacy to reflect kindness and generosity, not wealth. Sam and his family were overwhelmed by Betty's incredible gesture. Inspired by her selflessness, Sam decided to honor her legacy in the most meaningful way he could. He used the inheritance to bring his dream to life. An assisted living facility for low-income seniors. The facility, aptly named Grandma Betty's Haven, would provide a place where seniors could live with dignity, engage in enriching activities, and feel part of a loving community. Sam transformed Grandma Betty's home into the heart of the operation. It became a cozy, vibrant sanctuary, surrounded by nature and companionship. Julie planted a garden filled with Betty's favorite flowers, and the house echoed with music, laughter, and the warmth of togetherness, exactly as Betty would have wanted. Years later, Bryan, now a young man, stood proudly on the steps of Grandma Betty's Haven, ready to cut the ribbon for a new wing of the facility. His heart swelled with gratitude for the woman, who had seen in his family the values her own sons had forgotten. "Thank you, Grandma Betty," he whispered as he cut the ribbon. "We'll keep your legacy alive." The crowd cheered, and the facility's doors opened to welcome more seniors into the haven of love and care that Betty had inspired.
Underneath the stars, worlds begin